Welcome to the first East End Education Forum. During these shows, we'll discuss the challenges facing our schools and local innovations designed to meet those challenges. This series is sponsored by the East Hampton Education Foundation. They have provided programming, grants, and scholarships for East Hampton Town Public Schools since 2005. For today's panel, we have four outstanding school leaders. Deborah Winter, Superintendent of Springs. Sarah Smith, the principal of East Hampton High School. Michael Miller, the principal of Bridgehampton School. And Michael Cox, the AP of Bridgehampton School. And I am Bob Tymann, a retired educator. I spent 30 years as an educator at all different levels, and I will be your moderator. Today's topic is the silver lining, lessons learned. The last 2 years, our entire society has been put through a test. Everything has been shifted. We've been struggling to find out how to deal with this and get back to whatever normal was. When you think about businesses, nobody's going back to the office for 5 days. It's probably never going to happen again because other efficiencies have been found. They will be going back because you need those face-to-face meetings. When we order food, we do it differently now. When we shop, we do it differently now. Changes that were already in the mix have all been accelerated by the pandemic. We communicate differently. And we all want to get back to what we perceive as normal, but normal will not be what was before 2 years ago. It will be different because we've learned to do some things more efficiently. And what we want to discuss here is what have we learned through this trial in education that we want to keep, that we want to say, okay, we're better at this way. And it will help us be better educators of our children. So the first topic will be communication. Using technology, being forced to use technology to communicate with families, with staff, and to collaborate intra-staff or groups of teachers to meet and plan together. That all had to change. So let's dig into that first. Michael, as an AP, where did you see the changes that you think will help us as we move forward?
With regard to communication?
With regard to communication with any one of those groups or all those groups.
Well, if you just consider the time in general, just that everybody in that late spring and March was kind of just forced into being off campus and to think on their feet, you have to think about those communication pipelines. You mentioned a little bit, when you talk about the communication between the district and the community, teacher to teacher, teacher to student, teachers to administration, students to administration. There are a lot of pieces that can fall, especially given those new circumstances of everybody being out, So some of the things that I think came to the forefront in that experience was just the value of keeping that information flowing. It was an unknown situation for everybody, and I think that leveled the playing field. The hierarchy that you would consider with regard to administration to teachers, teachers to students, and students to teachers, and all of that whole construct was kind of just leveled, which was a beautiful thing, because everybody was navigating it for the first time, and so that collaborative effort was a team effort. And I think that was a really important piece.
And it's interesting because when you think about when you study communications in organizations, we have these charts of how it's supposed to flow, top down, of course. But then when you look at something organically, what you just described is the normal flow. It just now was right in our face. It was very clear that that's how we really communicate. Deb, from the superintendent's perspective, how did this shift?
Superintendents were talking to each other and sharing. It wasn't, okay, how do I reword this memo to go out that I'm not plagiarizing? It was, Deb, take it and run with it. What do you have? Well, I have a parent letter. Okay, give me your parent letter. I'll give you my staff letter. Those lines of communication were just we weren't in our own little igloo anymore. Suddenly, we were all talking to each other, and it was just wonderful. And I don't think we would have gotten through it unless we had that collaboration going, and we're in the same boat. And we've experienced the same kind of pushback, or how can we communicate more often? We all know that we're not an expert in everything. So who had more experience? And we go to that person, like the Department of Health or Enviro Science. Opening up to outside agencies to help us with the things that we didn't know, rather than seeing them as, quote, the enemy. Like anytime you mention, mold and they're going to come in, these are resources. We should look for their expertise. So I think that's, for me, that's one of the silver lining, is that we all communicated together and shared documents, and we didn't have to reinvent the wheel.
Do you see superintendents maintaining that collaborative atmosphere?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Mike, how about you?
I think we now know the importance of effective communication. Sometimes you send an email or you make a phone call, and you expect or you assume the person knows what you're saying or what you're looking for, but I think now we know how effective communication is. It's a two-way street. You talk about silver linings and ideas or things that we want to keep going forward. I think our school has used Google Meets. Some schools are using Zoom. That is an extremely effective way to still stay face-to-face with somebody, while at the same time not having to be in the room with them. It's also been a great thing for parents. Not every parent can get to the school when you need them to get there for a parent meeting or maybe a presentation, but I think you'll start to see more and more that people will start having things in person, also virtually. So it'll be more of an opportunity for parents to stay involved, even if they can't be at the school at that time.
Right. The ParentTeacher Night, parent meetings of all types, those I think will change forever at this point.
I think you're going to see more schools open to setting it up the easiest way for that parent. If the parent cannot be there for work-related issues, it's easy for a parent to go outside in their car, on their phone, to have a meeting face-to-face on Google Meet or Zoom than it is for them to take off work.
Right. Wonderful. Sarah, how about you? What did you see?
Yeah, so I think that we were in a situation where we were throwing everything against the wall and seeing what would stick. We would try anything. I know teachers were trying Remind apps with their students to get everything out. Google Meets with teachers were making videos, administrators were making videos to put out. And they were wonderful in terms of that allowed equity and access. Students could go back if they didn't understand something. And I think it ultimately increased the homeschool connection, that it improved our number of home visits. If we were concerned or there was just something that we had to get to the family or the students, we were doing more home visits than in the past, and I think it helped us really learn the value of that and helped families see the value of that. It also, as to piggyback off of Mike, it increased our participation in meetings that are important as CSEs, so both parents could be there. Perhaps in the past where you have two working parents, it didn't allow for both parents to be there. So we now have that as something else in our toolbox that could allow both parties to be there. So I think it really made us think creatively. For instance, something as simple as faculty meetings. A faculty meeting is on Zoom. I haven't kept that right now, but down the road, if need be, it's an option. So it does allow for more participation in some ways.
Right. Faculty meetings, I can see where that would be tough. That's a lot of faces.
Well, and we just wanted to be back in person.
Right.
So.
And all we're talking about, there's nothing that can substitute for us seeing each other right here, right now, having this conversation together. It would be different if it was on a Zoom. But if we weren't able to be here, Zoom would be better than not.
Board of Ed meetings.
Yes.
In person, you have two people sitting in the audience versus on, LTV, being on YouTube and being able to have people call in from their homes while you hear children in the background, but yet the parent has the ability to participate where before they couldn't drag their kids to a board meeting at night, but from their own home they could. And that was great because you really had parent participation in their child's education.
Right. And board meetings are traditionally, parents come, when there's an issue, you'll get a group of parents, but most times it's one or two people.
That's it. That's what we experienced just this past week. And yet somebody said, well, wouldn't it be nice to go back to where, you know, more people would participate?
What about among the teachers in planning and figuring out their day? Do you think they collaborated differently? And if so, was it something that will move forward? Sorry.
Yeah, so I think that, you know, if we take a step back from it, the lesson learned is that we leaned on each other. You know, it was a type of bonding among departments, among teachers. Oh, I tried this and it worked, you know, or I brought in this speaker and I was able to access them and it worked. So I think, yes, there were you know, strategies shared, but I think it kind of made us realize with new eyes the importance of sharing with each other what's working. So the specifics in terms of how that was done was Google Meet and things like that. But I think big picture, it was a reminder of how important that is and how meaningful that can be.
Well, you mentioned sharing successes, which says that there were failures, which is great. When you think about it, allowing people to fail with trying new things, that's how organizations get better. And it's not normal in education. It's not normal in our classrooms, it's not normal in our culture, but it is how organizations improve. And maybe that's something we can move forward with, that failing at something is better than not trying it, because you learn a lot by failing. And that's something we write to the classroom, to students, understanding that getting the right answer is not always as important as the process of thinking things through. Same thing with organizations. Recently, I read an article in Ed Week by someone, Peter DeWitt, and he talked about decluttering, which he describes as abandoning existing low-value practices. Is that something that happened during this COVID process? And go ahead, Deb.
So they had to work so much harder to be on a Google Meet with their students that grade levels started to say, well, why am I doing all the heavy lifting for every subject? You take ELA, I'll take math, I'll take social studies. The science teacher, we're lucky to have an elementary science teacher, he was embedding his science lessons per grade, and it made it manageable that they're continuing that today. Yes, it's giving up ownership. This is my classroom, this is my lesson, but they learned that they didn't have to do all the heavy lifting. They had colleagues that could do great math lessons. I'm just going to play the video now of, you know, Mrs. So-and-so doing her math lesson. Let's listen to her. And then meanwhile, her ELA lesson is being taught to the other second grade classrooms because they had to. We had to survive. These teachers were working from home with their own children in their living rooms. Think about that challenge. They couldn't wait to come back and be in a classroom and have their children in a classroom. So they had to learn to work smarter.
And by doing that, and now getting back to hopefully a more normal setting, they're freeing up time. And time is the one factor that has always been too short in education. We don't have time to plan properly. And if we can get teachers more time to do their planning, everything's going to benefit from that. Mike, what do you think?
I'm starting to think that you saw a shift in priorities, or what was prioritized.
Yes.
You started seeing, and I'm hoping that you're going to continue to see, is obsessing over academics or obsessing over report cards or local or state assessments. That was something that was high on the radar. I think you're starting to see we're prioritizing mental health. We're prioritizing connections and those creating those deeper relationships, not only with the staff, but also with the students, and also that home-to-school partnership. And I think the last piece is every state in New York, or every school district in New York, had to provide food through the pandemic, and that's one thing that we're very proud of here in Bridgehampton. We had a lot of community members and staff members who went above and beyond to make sure, because as we know now, or we should have known, is not everybody has the resources at home for a healthy diet. So I think you saw less obsession of maybe academics, and you started seeing more prioritizing to mental health needs, like I said, healthy diet, and just when you create deeper connections, deeper relationships with students and staff and family, you'll see at the end, the results will be there.
It's funny because for the 3 or 4 years before the pandemic, the SEL, getting to the socio-emotional literacy was big, but it was moving the way schools usually change, very, very slowly. But now it smacked us in the face. When it came to the pandemic, it was no avoiding that. And now as we get past that, understanding that, as you said, if students aren't stable emotionally, if students aren't fed and ready to learn, they're not going to learn. And that's not anything about, that's the human part, that's how we are. You need to be in a comfortable, stable place to focus on learning, and now we're starting to realize that a lot of our students struggle with that, and we need to help them get to that place if we expect them to learn in our classrooms. Sarah, how was your experience?
Yeah, and I
there?
think that just to piggyback on that, I think that Zoom and Google Meet, like, we were literally in their homes, and I think that really, I think teachers are always aware of what their students may struggle with, but that made us more keenly aware by far. So I think the decluttering aspect of it, I think it really made us focus on what is important, what really matters. In the classroom, I think teachers were able to take a step back and gain perspective about what is it that my students really need to be successful in this unit or this lesson. And we were less worried about pacing and assessment and assessments that might not have as much teeth. And we worried about assessments that are more meaningful and might really demonstrate what they know or what they learned. But I think beyond that, from an administrative perspective and a teacher perspective as well, we were worried about things like their attendance. Are they coming? Are they okay? I think in general, the way that we spoke about it is we talked about connection before content, that we knew we needed to connect with our students physically sometimes, or literally, and also connect from an academic perspective because we didn't necessarily have them showing up in the building. They weren't coming to school at the time, so we had to have a reason for them to hop on to Zoom.
Michael?
I think it's really interesting in hearing from each one of you and me kind of talking last, which is fine, because I can hear a common theme of prioritizing what's most important, which is interesting when you think about a pandemic and being in a situation like that is now we're forced into prioritizing what we believe is important. So when Mr. Miller mentions local assessments, and I heard Sarah mention different assessment measures and things like that, if you don't have that piece that's kind of that over-looming accountability piece for teachers that feel that pressure to get through content and things like that, now they can start to focus on what they believe are the best assessment measures, what they believe are the best instructional practice measures, right? And when you have kids that are on campus and in person, they can just be compliant, they can be there, right? But when you're not in person and now you have to start thinking about your methods of engaging them from an intrinsic standpoint in terms of showing up, in terms of attendance. What is my why for showing up in this digital meeting? And it really gets you to think about prioritizing that. You talk about decluttering. You can declutter from a structural perspective, but I think the theme that we're hearing here is decluttering from what would be the mindset perspective from an instructional standpoint and how students best learn. So I think it was a great opportunity for teachers to really reflect on how students best learn, each individual. And you are in their living room, so that is really kind of, it's close and tight-knit in this past pandemic. So.
I mean, one of the things we've done as educators over the decades is continually add to what we are trying to teach students and never taking anything away. And this forced us to say, oh, we can't do all this anymore. What are the most important things we need all of our students to get? And let's focus on that, which I hopefully will stick with that. Digital literacy, okay? I'm sure that staff and students both had to take a major shift. And again, this was something that was in the works. We were giving personal devices out to students already. We were in that process, but now everything got accelerated. Sarah, how did that affect you?
Yeah, so everyone was given a device, and then everyone had to learn how to use it effectively. So there was definitely, I would say, a steep learning curve with teachers, not necessarily in terms of not knowing how to use the technology, but how to use it effectively, what programs were working, what activities were working, how to vary instruction, because keeping students' attention on Zoom is much different than keeping their attention in the classroom. So, you know, my own husband, who teaches science, had stories about having to, you know, adjust and modify his instruction every 10 minutes or so, change it up so that he's keeping his students engaged. And I would say parents had to adjust and learn how to participate, because they had to now oversee their child's education in a different way. And so parents had to learn the programs that we were using, and of course students as well. You know, they had to learn how to navigate those themselves.
Michael?
I think the first thing when we went out was just kind of measuring the inequity with regard to accessibility for the digital access. We really were fortunate at Bridgehampton for having a very a donor for one-to-one devices. For us, a very I don't know what word I'm looking for. He's just a very extremely generous, extremely selfless. And it wasn't just Bridgehampton. This human being helped many East End districts. Right, I see Deb raising her hand. Pretty incredible when you know, and when you have these crisis situations, people come together, right? And I think that Sarah brings up a good point, because you had mentioned that disparity between that tech-based knowledge from students and teachers, but parents had to learn that too, because the learning was happening in their living room, in their kitchens, in their bedrooms, right? So everybody was coming here to learn new things. From a digital literacy perspective, I think that it is something that everybody right now, moving forward, can add to their kind of Batman tool belt of resources, you know, and the disparity between what teachers knew prior to pre-pandemic, because everybody had their you know, efficiency with technology. That disparity is kind of, it's leveling out, you know, and they're finding the benefit in it all the way around.
Yeah, I know for myself, I taught at Stony Brook, and during the pandemic they said, do you want to teach? And I was like, I don't know how. And they were like, okay, we do it all through Zoom. And I'm not really nimble with technology. I was like panicked. And then I said, okay, I'll try. And you do it. You do it. And I'm sure there are many teachers who are close to my age who are saying the same thing, like, I'm going to retire in 5 years. I don't, you know, but they did it. They made the shift, and now you're right. There's another thing in their tool belt when needed.
There's also a sense of humility, because teaching is a very personal kind of profession. You know what you know, and you believe in what you do, and you know what works, and you're used to what works, right? And so then when you're pushed into a situation, and I mentioned this earlier with everyone kind of leveling the playing field, that humility is, well, I don't know, but now I'm not just forced to learn, I'm willing to learn, right? And from a digital literacy perspective, and just to kind of couple that with communication, we had teachers that were stepping up in situations just naturally. I'm going to make myself available for an office hours because I actually have the professional capital in this area, right? I understand this digital literacy, I understand this component, and I'm willing to help anybody who's willing to be helped. And that was pretty remarkable.
Yes. Yes. Deb, how was your experience?
Well, we had the same donor. In fact, we have an enrollment increase of about 66 students, K to 8. So I reached out to that donor again in hopes that he would accommodate us, because we anticipate kindergartners getting a Chromebook, but we didn't anticipate 66 new students getting a Chromebook.
Right.
And now those Chromebooks have become our new reality. So it's not an option anymore. And we were there. We had started the initiative. We were grade 4 to 8. So we had some catch up to do when it hit, but thanks to that donor, we were. And it also gave our parents a perspective of what their children needed for the future, for what education's going to look like even down the road. Like, we're a bubble at Springs. They go up to the high school, and one of the things I did ask the high school students when I first came out to the East End is, what do you need? And one of the things they did say is they needed to be more independent.
Yes.
And Spring School kind of helped them be not so independent by feeding them everything. With this home situation, these students had to watch the clock. They had to sign on at a certain time because some of their parents weren't home. They were essential workers. So if you go back and you ask those 9th and 10th graders this year what they took away from this, they would say they are independent. They know how to get up on time. They know how to log on time. You can't replicate that, you know? It forced our kids to grow up a little bit, but not in a bad way, to be responsible for their own learning. And isn't that what we want even today in the classrooms? And that's a hard shift for our teachers. Let the kids do the heavy lifting. Let them explore. Let them come back to you. Susan, you spoke about test. You couldn't do a multiple choice test. They could look up the answer on their phone. You had to give them the tough question, the critical thinking question, so that you could assess that they knew what you were talking about, so that they didn't go to the Google and ask them the answer to the question, but they had to think.
Which is the kind of deep learning we would love to shift to from pre-K up. Mike, how was yours?
We're really extremely lucky in Bridgehampton. We are a one-to-one district in regards to Chromebooks. But like Mr. Cox mentioned in March, we were forced to learn rapidly, learn quick. But we're very lucky in our school district. We are a Google Suite school. The majority of the teachers are well aware of Google Classroom and how to use that technology. But for some of the teachers who are unaware, like Mr. Cox mentioned, we do have multiple staff members who on their own time would set up Google Meets, and they would meet with different staff members to answer and address any questions. One thing I think was highlighted during the pandemic was what students have support and what students do not at home.
Yes.
So I think that was something that was definitely highlighted, and you can kind of see who has the students who had the support at home were able to be on time, like Deb said, or they were able to complete their work. And then the students who didn't have that support, they really had to grow up. You had to start being responsible for time management, responsible for your character traits, and just making sure you were getting out of bed each day. So I think that was one thing that was highlighted throughout the pandemic.
Yeah, I think the nature of elementary school, especially in the low grades, is to make sure everybody feels like they were successful, which means, I don't want to say coddling in a bad way, in a very well-intended way, but making sure that everybody got to the same place at the same time, but not of their own fruition. You know, so allowing a little more independence, putting a little more responsibility on the students, even in that, kindergarten age, I think in the long run is of great benefit, and I actually think there are many kids who will enjoy that.
If you expect more, you get more.
Yeah, and I think that sense of independence, that I'm doing this. You're not doing this for me, I'm doing this. That's the type of strength we want to see in our students as they move up the grades. Okay, the learning experiences that we develop for students. How did that shift? What did you see as the more successful type of instruction when we couldn't be in the classroom? And what does that tell us about something that's already come up a couple of times, intrinsic motivation and things like that? Michael?
When you look at it from a digital perspective throughout this time, I think it was moving from what would be compliance to what is engagement. You can have students that are on campus and in classrooms that are compliant, right? But when they're off and they're in that meeting and they have to get up and they have to navigate whatever personal things are happening at home, they have to engage and they have to want to engage, right? It's easy not to click on that button and hop in. And so as teachers, as administrators, as educators, how do we now reframe our practice to prioritize, to switch the mindset to engage these students? So then you have to really look at, you know, the delivery methods, right? Your delivery methods, the collaboration methods. And I think that the digital aspect of it lent itself well to having teachers have the ability to do that. But I think that engagement is a huge piece to switch your practice and focus on that instructional practice from an engagement standpoint. So you talk about deep learning, I think, and you talk about pacing, and Mike, you say you expect more, you get more. I agree with that, but at the same time, I think there was a sensitivity to students getting things done and meeting them where they were, and us as administrators giving teachers the autonomy to feel like it's okay to say, look, these are the goals. This is what these are the tasks that I need you to accomplish, but it's not going to be in a 38-minute period. We're working together, we're navigating this together, so we have a sensitivity. I hear you, I value you, let's work together. So I think there was a sensitivity to to that pacing of content and prioritizing what's most important for them. So.
Yes. Deb, what did you see?
What was nice with the technology was we did have some students that had to go to work with their parents. So the ability to have a teacher record a lesson and make it available later on in the day for that child, even though they couldn't join the actual meeting, was that student felt like that teacher cared just because, oh, you videotaped it for me? No, so easy on Google to just say, I'm recording now. So if that child was at work with that parent later on, they could see their friends. We struggled with the cameras being on because, remember, we had talked about not having your cameras on in the classroom. Some of our cameras weren't even enabled. And now you're asking them just the opposite. Turn on your camera, we want to see you. So that was a hard concept for us. But you told us not to turn on our cameras. No, we want you to turn on your cameras and we want to see you. And that was really important. They felt special by having that video, you know, and the science teacher just like, I watched some of his just to laugh. You know, he had his daughter as his assistant in the kitchen. All right, go to the pantry and get this. And now you're gonna put this in the water. And it was like, whoo, you know, like, yeah. They did a really good job, our teachers. And as I said, they were struggling with their own family issues. So I just hope that we can get over this and get back to, quote, some normalcy, because they're tired, you know.
Yeah, oh, they must be, everybody's exhausted. Yeah. You know, when you talk about videotaping a lesson and having it there for students to watch, I mean, I don't know how many years ago Khan Academy started.
Yes.
And that was the concept behind Khan Academy,
Yes.
a videotape lesson that students could go back and rewatch. And it was like, oh, so, you know, big deal. But no, it is a big deal. When a student can go and say, I think I remember the teacher saying something about this, but I forgot. I can go back and see it again. That's powerful. So that is a wonderful practice. If we can get that to be one of the norms, that would be fantastic. Mike.
I think you know now how important teachers are, especially direct instruction. The importance of a teacher in a student's life. I mean, the best predictor of student success is the educator in that room. You just mentioned Khan Academy, but I think direct instruction, whether that be in person or through a Google Meet and Zoom, having the ability to go back and forth with an educator. Khan Academy is a nice addition, or taping is a nice addition, but I think we'll never, that's not the best way to go forward with instruction, in my opinion. One-on-one with a teacher or face-to-face, whether that be virtually or in a classroom, I think is, we know now that teachers do amazing things, and they are the reason that we have success in our school. So I think Google Meet was a great tool to use while we were in the pandemic or while we were on virtual, but I think we'll never go back to, I think we need to stay with direct instruction, and we need to have teachers going back and forth with our students.
Oh, I agree 100% with the direct instruction being what we want. I was only looking at Khan Academy as we can go back and take another look.
No, it's definitely
at
great
that,
for students to do that.
That's all I saw as the positive. You're right. Being able to look someone
It's an
in the eye.
enhancement. And it enhances the lesson, enhances the unit.
Yeah. Because especially someone like me who forgets 5 minutes later, it's like, I know this happened, but being able to go back and review by pushing a button, that helps.
Well, look, in college, sometimes you get a professor that you can't understand. My son would often go to another professor at another college teaching the same course who it was all digitized.
Mm-hmm.
So he could get the same concepts from somebody else that he could better understand.
Right, right. Sarah?
So the instruction that worked, I think, was interesting combination of flexibility and relevance. I think that we weren't in a position where we could force students to sign on or show up. And it went a long way if a student wasn't, was late to a Zoom, you still let them on, or that they didn't understand a concept. So many teachers were so flexible. Okay, I'll meet you later for extra help, holding office hours, holding extra help so that students could still get the content. And I think what was really, there were so many avenues where we could make the pandemic relevant to our content. When we talked about food shortage, when we look at it from the perspective of our science classes, and the ability to weave our content into what they were experiencing at that moment, that was when it, was off the charts and very successful. And I think our teachers did a beautiful job of adjusting their instruction and their content and their curriculum to try to bring those things in. While all the while, I think students knowing that their teachers understood, the obstacles that they were facing, I think that went a long way with our students and families too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that, I lost my train of thought. Hold on a sec. All right, we'll just move on. It's gone. In what other ways have we become efficient at organizing and managing school, one, and then at connecting students, teachers, and content? So management and then instruction.
You asking me?
Yes, I'm sorry, Sarah.
Well, again, I think that it just, the whole pandemic, the whole experience of being, an administrator during the pandemic, it does make you look at every system and say, what is important? What do we need to keep? What makes us better? And what is something that we don't have to spend our resources or our energy worrying about? And so I do think it gave us a clear eye for what is very important. And, from my personal perspective, that is, the health and well-being of students and teachers and families. Sorry, I also lost my train of thought.
It's catchy.
Yeah, exactly. I completely lost my train of thought. I'm sorry. I'm going to pass the mic.
Well, I'm glad I'm sitting 2 away from Bob, because if this is contagious, it hasn't
It's
really
working its
gotten
way
to me
down.
yet, but maybe in this, in me talking, I'll lose my train of thought. But,
It'll come back.
you're mentioning I essentially forgot the question that you were asking, but when you're talking about a management perspective and an instructional perspective, everybody was making these decisions and navigating this for the first time. I had mentioned it earlier how we leveled the playing field, but when you make these decisions and you're trying to manage it now as an administrator, it's a first for everybody. Deb mentioned collaborating with everybody, a huge piece that is not going to go away. So everybody feels now comfortable for saying, I don't know, I have no idea how to do this, can you help me, right? And not only is that from a management perspective beneficial for all of us to learn, but it's also a lead by example to everyone who doesn't know, right? Because you look at an administrator or a management position, it's like you hold this feeling that they know, They have the answers,
Right.
right? But we all don't. So it made that management piece really, really important in terms of prioritizing what are most important. Talk about social emotional health for students, and embedding that in the instruction for everyone is first and foremost, because that's a huge, huge piece. And we haven't really talked about it too much here in depth, but it is really everything, because everything hinges on that piece.
And I think we're going to be devoting an entire show to that.
Well,
That-
wonderful.
Yes. And I think you're very right in that being able to admit that we're not sure how this is going to work, but we're going to try it anyway. We always knew that. It was always true, but now we can actually admit it, which is important for everybody to see everybody as struggling and working towards something.
Exactly.
Deb, you had something you had mentioned before that I think fits here about your buses.
Yeah, I was going to mention that and my nurses. So when you talk about systems, our administrators were spending a great deal of time on bus discipline. When it came to having to take attendance and know who was sitting next to who for contact tracing, I went to the board, and for minimal amount of money, we hired our teacher assistants, who are underpaid and needed extra hours, to ride our buses in the morning, take attendance, make sure the children had their mask on, and we stayed with that this year. And we do not have the referrals for discipline anymore. There is someone who is the eyes. The bus driver can't have eyes behind his head. His job is, or her job is, to drive that bus. So these monitors on the bus for a small amount of money has made a huge difference in what my principal and assistant principal have to deal with every day. And I think the biggest management is administrators think they're alone. This pandemic has had me working so closely with our nurses and our custodians. We are now, and our technology people, when I do cabinet, those people are invited to those cabinet meetings. Before it was just the administrators. But now my tech people are the first ones on the agenda. How are we doing technology? What do we need? Nurses are next. How are you guys making out? What do you need? And I think if we don't have any other takeaway, what do our staff, our teachers need? Custodians, what do you need to do your job? And now we should be going to our students. They're struggling. They are really hurting. We're seeing it. What do you need? Having those conversations, whether it's small group, by classroom. I pulled a child aside this morning. She was like a pretzel in her chair. Like, what's going on? Talk to me. And we can't forget those conversations and respond to those needs. I wish the bus drivers had said something sooner to me, or the administrators had said something sooner, that, you know what, we could use monitors on the bus.
It sounds like you're becoming a team, from top to bottom, a team.
And again, we can't know it all.
Right.
So if my custodians need new equipment, bring in somebody that can evaluate our equipment and make recommendations to purchase new equipment. There's no fault on me. I'm just not that expert. Like we did with security. When school security became an issue, we didn't know it, but we relied on our retired police officers. Do an assessment of this building. The sheriff's department came out. What do I need here? Because I don't know. And that's okay.
Yeah, we don't have all the answers.
Absolutely. I mean, I know everyone kind of touched upon different topics, but I would say very similar to what Sarah said, looking at it as a system approach, and what Deb and Mike said. I can still remember March of 2020, that Friday, and we were told that the county exec was probably going to shut schools down for 2 weeks, but we weren't really sure. And then everyone's looking at the administrators to have every answer. And that was, you want to have the answers, you want to lead by example, you want to be on the forefront, you want to be out there and telling people we're going to do X, Y, and Z. But unfortunately, we didn't know what X, Y, Z was at that time. Right. So I think what Deb mentioned, utilizing the resources you have at your disposal. I don't have to have all the answers, we don't have to have all the answers, but collectively the wisdom's in the room. And utilizing everyone in your school district to move your district forward.
I'm curious about this. We had a lot of innovation, but two of the districts are larger as far as their Gradespan Bridgehampton being K through 12, and Springs being K through 8. Did you see different things working at different levels? Because elementary school, K, 1, 2, they're so different from 7th and 8th grade and from high school. Were there differences in things that worked efficiently on the different grade levels? You look like you've got it already, Michael?
No, but
It's got
but
the
yeah,
answers.
right? So, I mean, when you're thinking about how the teaching was, just the way in which the teaching was being delivered, you have a 5-year-old in their parents' living room
Yes.
with mom or dad who, if they're there, great, because they have to be there to make sure that they're navigating whatever it is for them, you know. And then you have a high school student who, and middle school students even in particular, very uniquely, parents still have to go to work, right? So you now have a middle school student who has to take care of their siblings, right? And so earlier we talked about students having to, you know, the increased accountability. I know Debbie was touching upon this a little bit, but how about the unintended responsibilities now that they had to assume in addition to everything else under the sun, the stresses, the unknown, the instruction, the getting into their own meets while their sibling in first grade is trying to tie their, you know, figure out where their book is, you know.
Right.
So in terms of varying instruction from pre-K, which we have in Bridgehampton through 12 in the same building, it's unique because we can see those differences.
Mm-hmm.
And they were so different just from a developmental standpoint. So we had to get creative, you know, and I mentioned it earlier in terms of saying, look, we're in the room, we're gonna have these conversations. Mike said the wisdom's in the room. It's true, because so how can we most effectively make this work? And it wasn't just the teachers and the administration. It was everyone. It was administrators, it was teachers, it was parents, it was the kids. Everybody was coming together to figure out how they best learn. So it became personalized. It became very unique in that way, which actually it should be anyway.
Do you think we learned to differentiate better? And for parents watching, differentiation really just means meeting each student where they are,
Right.
On an individual level as much as possible.
Absolutely. I think differentiation is a word that's been discussed ad
Right.
nauseum, right? But I think that, you know, in this situation, it was you really had to differentiate to make sure that you were getting students either engaged, learning what you intended for them to learn. So the differentiation became essential. It became everything. So yeah, I mean that was a huge piece of it, because that was a have to.
And that skill that we learned, that the importance of that, the ability to do it on a large scale. Now we're bringing those devices back in the classroom. We can still do that. So we don't have to lose that and still have face-to-face instruction.
In terms of, I don't know if it's exactly differentiation, but where I saw it very effective is teachers were reaching out. You know, if a student wasn't showing up or having trouble, they were reaching out to them individually, you know, and that was happening with our nurses, with student supervisors, with administration, with teachers. And I know that's not instructional differentiation, but it was meeting the individual needs of students, and that was very effective.
And it is an instructional, but it's the foundation needed if we're going to be successful with our instruction. So
Yeah.
very important. Mike?
I definitely think you saw a very different virtual learning in the elementary school versus the secondary school. Very similar to what Mike said. You need that support at home. If you're a kindergartner or maybe even up to 5th grade, if you don't have that parent available or that older sibling to help you navigate the Google Classroom or navigate the Google Meet. That's why our school made probably one of the toughest decisions we've ever had to make. Was last year we opened up our school kindergarten to 6th grade, and we decided for our 7th through 12th to go virtual, because we knew parents were going back to work, and we knew they weren't going to have those resources or that support at home. So that was a very tough decision to say we're going to split our school up, half virtual, half in person. It was a very tough decision, but that is why we did it, because the elementary students need additional support.
Yeah. Yeah, and parents had to go back to work.
Parents had to go back to work,
Yeah.
and we were comfortable, as you can be, asking students to stay home 7th through 12th grade, that a 7th grader would be able to manage a school day on the Chromebook, but we weren't very comfortable with a kindergartner doing that.
Right, right. And when the kindergartner, first grader used the Chromebook, Now they're learning their letters, their numbers. So they're not typing. How did that?
Like I said earlier, we were very fortunate to have Chromebooks one-to-one, so that wasn't the first time they've ever been on it.
Okay.
But they definitely weren't efficient. But it was definitely something that they needed additional support on. But that's why we need that parent or that sibling to assist as much as possible. And it's very tough for the teacher. You're on a screen, you're with 15 kids on a screen, and they're 5. So, and then we also had concerns of parents with screen time. So how often or how long can you put a 5 or a 7-year-old on a screen?
When you were doing virtual learning, did you stick to a traditional bell schedule?
When we first started, we didn't. In the elementary school or the secondary, we did. But this last year, 7th through 12th grade, we did stick to our bell schedule as much as possible. So that's a long day. On a Chromebook, our periods are 38 minutes. We have 10 periods in the day. Every student obviously has lunch and they have a study hall. So really, you're thinking 8 periods a day, 38 minutes. They were online with their teacher and their classmates. So it is a long day.
That's tough.
It is tough.
Deb, how about you?
Yeah, we didn't go that route. Did we get criticized for it, that we didn't do that live teaching, recording from the classroom? We had to think about developmentally what was appropriate for our students. We didn't boggle them down with homework. There was no homework K to 8. We wanted children to get outside when they weren't on. It was minimal, I'll admit, on the elementary level, and parents said, you need to do more. But they're little. How long can they stay on a Chromebook for? The secondary, they didn't have art, music, they had to be independent with their phys ed. There were activities for them to do and logs for them to complete. But you couldn't expect these kids to sit. I can't sit for that length of time. So, it wasn't to the level that it was supposed to be, and we were under construction. We didn't have space to begin with, so I tried very hard to bring back the students systematically, special ed first, E&L, elementary, and by March we were back full time, and we did it, safely, but it was difficult. It was so unfair not to be able to bring back at least the elementary students right away, When
you think about the decisions we have to make in our districts, the difference in the physical structure of the buildings, that plays into it, and how many kids are in each classroom, that all plays into this. You could spread out, right? And if you brought back just the elementary, you had small groups and you could spread them out. You had room.
That's why we had to ask our 7th through 12th to go virtual, because we really split up our sections. We have 1 section per grade level, but we split it up, so we had 2 sections per grade level in the elementary school, so we're utilizing the whole building.
Right.
So that's why someone had to stay home.
You had that possibility, whereas that was not a possibility for you.
No, I was literally, I had 700 students in a building that was made for 450.
Right.
And that was before pandemic.
Right. So, okay. The last question, we've got about 5 minutes left. Given what we've learned about teaching and learning during the pandemic, how would you like to see teacher preparation programs shift their instruction? What would you like your new teachers to know that would help? Sarah?
Yeah, I'd say quality over quantity, that what your assessments are, what you're teaching, the choice involved in that, and those are sometimes hard decisions to make, but I think we learned that they're such important decisions, and I think teachers often feel rushed and feel pressure to cover. And if teacher preparation programs could emphasize that it's not about coverage, but more about really focusing on what's important and what do students really need. And I, of course, would also like to see large focus on not only the importance of SEL, social emotional learning, for those of you who are watching and might not know the lingo, and not only the importance of that, but concrete strategies on how to weave that into your content and your instruction and your existing curriculum.
Mike?
That's a good point. For new teacher preparation programs, I think something at the forefront should be SEL, social emotional learning, and having new teachers be comfortable with taking the time to establish those relationships with their kids, because relationships are everything. And one of the things that you're coming on as a new teacher is you're worried about getting through the content and making sure the students are learning and they're demonstrating learning and they're doing well academically. But I think that pendulum needs to shift now to a more balanced approach with whole child. It's not just get through the content. It's making sure everyone feels valued, everyone's safe, everyone feels loved, and you spend the time to get to know everybody, and you spend the time, right, to get to know them. Then you mentioned strategies in place. That's a huge piece as well, but it is everything, and should continue to be. So I'm glad even from this entire experience, that is one of the things even that the state is really focusing on. It's almost like hitting the reset button on what's most important. You talk about prioritizing things, and that's a huge piece of the puzzle. It is the biggest piece, and everything else will be successful as a result of that in place. So
Something we've talked about for many years now, we're actually pushing.
Which is interesting,
We're being
isn't it?
pushed to do it.
because you can talk about it all day
Yes.
long, but now when you see the effects of the lack of these relationships, interpersonal socialization with kids and being together with their friends and their peers and having the opportunity to see each other, you can see now the effect of that social emotional growth or lack of growth, especially from a primary and even early on level. Some of these students have never even been in school, and they're in it for the first time.
Yeah, we're missing though a piece. There are a great many individuals out there that can be great teachers. They have a wealth of knowledge. They can't pass these tests. So when you talk about the state, they need to do something about these tests, because they're TAs in my building and they can make wonderful teachers. They have all the skill sets, the connections with kids, and because of one test, they're never going to become a teacher. That's really unfortunate and something we have to rethink. It's not everybody's a test taker.
Right.
And there's other ways to evaluate, and we need to look at APPR as well. When you look at SEL, where is that? You know what I mean? The whole rubric has to change, and that connection with kids has to be the primary focus, the passion for teaching. Mike?
No, I agree. I mean, I think first and foremost, I'd want teachers or new teachers to know it's all about creating relationships, creating connections. That's first and foremost. And we talk about social emotional learning or test taking, but if you can't build a relationship or create a connection, not only with the student, but also the other staff members in the building and also the parents, you're not going to be as successful as you want to be.
You talk about testing and how we test our professionals. I think one of the topics we should have a discussion about here is assessment in general. Straight down from how we become professionals to how we determine our kids have mastered content. That's something I hope will have some shifts due to COVID. That's about it for our time. I'd like to thank you all for coming. I hope this has been a productive conversation, and it was great to get to have a discussion. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Thank
Rob.
you.
Thank you.
Now for
Thanks.